Go.
So this week we're going to talk about the reverse creaming method. First week we talked about creaming method for cookies. Last week we talked about creaming method for cakes. This week we're talking about reverse creaming method. Now just to review a little bit, creaming method, we put our butter and our sugar with our paddle attachment on the bowl and we cream that till it's light and fluffy. We start the creaming method for cakes the very same way, except when we get to the wet ingredients, we alternate flour, milk, until it's fully incorporated, because with cakes we have more liquid and we need some of that flour to absorb that liquid. So now with the reverse creaming method, we're going to really throw you for a loop here, because what happens with this is all the dry ingredients go in the bowl first, along with the sugar. Very different from our regular mixing method when we cream things. Then our butter and our half of our sour cream is going to go in there. And then the rest of our eggs and our sour cream are going to go in. The reason for this is when we use a reverse creaming method, we want a sturdy type cake that is also tender. What kind of cakes are sturdy and tender? Layer cakes, coffee cakes. Another thing that this will do, it'll minimize the development of the gluten, which is that protein in the flour that is activated when it comes in contact with liquid. This will also give us less air, because as you remember, when we cream for cakes and cookies with the regular creaming method, we incorporate a lot of air. We don't get as much air into this type of product as we do with the others. So I'm going to start this about a medium speed, get the flour, sugar, baking soda going. Then I'm going to add my softened pieces of butter, minus the wrapper, into the bowl. Now what it'll do is this butter is going to latch on to those flour particles. That's going to give us the tenderness. When we get to our biscuits and our scones, soda bread, that mixing method, you'll notice we'll rub flour and butter together, and we notice we get tender scones and biscuits. Well, that's some of the reason. This butter is going to grab onto that flour, and it's going to help us out. So we're going to let that go for a few seconds. Then I'm going to shut it off and add part of the sour cream to this mixture. So I have a cup and a half of sour cream in this whole recipe. Half of it's going to go in now. The other cup went with the 4 eggs and the vanilla. That's going to be added in additions over there. So in some ways, this is easier than a regular creaming method, because we don't have to wait for that butter and sugar to cream and come together and get light and fluffy. You'll notice you can still see the particles of the butter in the mixing bowl, which is good. And this is going to almost look like a fine crumb when it's done. We're going to do 3 additions of the sour cream for about 15 to 20 seconds each. Then at the end, we're going to turn it up for 1 minute to run on high. So we'll start with our sour cream and our eggs. And you'll notice this is nice and combined. So about a third of that mixture is going to go in the bowl. And we're going to let it run. At first, it's going to kind of look a little clumpy, almost doughy-like, cement-type like. And once it's around the paddle there, I know it's incorporated, so I'll shut that off. Add another third. Let it run again. Almost looks like a pat of choux or a cream puff dough at this point. A very thick batter. Almost something between a bread batter and a cake batter. Now we're gonna add the last addition of our eggs and sour cream. This is gonna go for about 10 or 15 seconds. Then we're gonna shut it off, scrape it down. We're gonna let it run on high for exactly 1 minute. Notice now with the last addition there, it's beginning to look more and more like a batter. However, we do see on the paddle, and we do see in the bottom of the bowl, there are some lumps and it's a little clumpy. So we'll take a look at this. I'll scrape down the bottom. And this is where my timer comes in handy. I love to work with timers because you get busy with other stuff and distractions in the kitchen and you're not always aware of what's going on or what's in the oven or what's in the mixer. So set a timer for a minute. Let that run, and now I'm going to just cover this for a second because it's going to run on high and I don't want it spraying all over my kitchen. Once most of that gets incorporated, you can kind of see in the bowl it's moving very quickly. So if you haven't done so already, which you should have, grease some flour here in your pan. This is where our coffee cake's going to go into. And I have the center and for the top of this cake. I have a mix of pecans and walnuts in this one. You can leave the nuts out as well. That's fine too if you're allergic to nuts. You're not liking nuts. This is a go-to recipe my mother used to use all the time. So now I'm finding out some of the stuff that she used to make that I'm now using. Very handy. Get my timer off. So that's a minute. You notice inside the mixing bowl how smooth it actually looks. I'm going to take this over to our prepared pan here. Now when I'm doing this at school, it usually goes about 35 minutes or so in the oven, but those ovens are a little bit stronger. So I may be closer to 45 or an hour here, which is okay because we're not going anywhere. And when it comes out, I usually let it cool for about a half an hour before we take it out of the pan and cut it. So now I'm going to take about 2 cups of this on the bottom, evenly spreading it around. It's half on that side. Notice how smooth the batter is after we ran that extra minute. That's half on this side. Now this is where you'll see when you cut into those cakes and you see that streusel lining in the middle of the cake. Well, this is where it comes from. It comes from this addition right here, which I like to put more here because what I put on the top when it's done and we invert it, a lot of that goes to waste, and this is a good amount of flavor here, so I like to use that. Sometimes we have more topping than we need, which is fine too. Always save it for something else. Another thing I do with this is I make muffins out of this, coffee cake muffins, which come out very well. And they're a lot quicker, obviously, because they're a lot smaller. In about 15 or 20 minutes, those will cook up for you. And the kids usually put the streusel in the middle of those. AP flour, which we use. People have asked me, can you use cake flour for this? Well, we need the structure for this cake. It needs to be sturdy, like we said before. And sometimes if you use straight cake flour for a cake like this, you may not get that structure, so I tend not to for this. Just gonna get all that in there. Batter almost looks good enough to eat now with a spoon. So we got the rest of our topping here. I may save some of it for these kids at home for their oatmeal or stuff we're doing at home. It's a nice cinnamony smell. I wish you could smell it's a good day for this because it's a little cool out today for April, I think. Only in the 40s here. So we'll spread this over the top. And like I said, I'm going to have some extra here. If I put all this on there, when I invert the cake, it's going to just spill out. So I'm just going to leave a little bit in the pan there, which I'll use for something else. So now tap it on my ooh, it's hot sort of thing where I drop it. What does that do? Well, it just kind of knocks any excess air bubbles out of there, and it distributes the batter in the pan and my topping nicely. So we're going to throw this in the oven. Like I said, it may be close to an hour in this oven. And then we'll see when it's done. We'll let it cool for half an hour. We'll see what it looks like when it comes out. And we'll flip it over, and we'll get to taste it. So we'll wait and see.
Okay.
Once again, we'll notice as food cooks, it generally shrinks. So it'll be receding in or moving in from the side of the pan. We touch the top. My hand's not going through the cake or the batter. And then finally, we put our tester in there. Comes out clean with a few moist crumbs. Now we're going to let this sit about a half an hour before we unmold it. Then we can unmold it and see what it looks like.
Okay.
So after it's sat about a half an hour, we're going to invert it onto a plate, open it up, and you can see it's still a little warm, so we'll wait a little bit to cut it. We have a nice round coffee cake there.
Okay.
This is warm, but it'll still give you the idea. And we slice a piece. That's the streusel in the center, that line we were talking about. Right there. And this needs nothing. A little powdered sugar maybe, a little fresh whipped cream, but really could eat it just by itself.
Yummy.